Good morning. This is Rory, PepTok, and I'm bringing you guys another interview. Today we've got Josh from Trustpointe Analytical, I believe the CEO and head chemist. Hey, Josh, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Rory?
Not bad. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your laboratory, and how you got started.
Yeah. So actually, I'm the managing director for TrustPoint Analytics. My wife is president and CEO.
I
And
apologize to her.
no, you're fine. She's right here, and you'll probably see her doing some of the stuff in the background. But I'm the guy when the toilet clogs. I get to unclog the toilets. Right. That's a managing director job, not a president job. As far as TrustPoint Analytics, we have a pharmaceutical quality control background. And for probably the last 15 years, we've been thinking about starting a lab of our own. We just we didn't find a good entry point. There's a lot of barriers to entries for labs. And then I stumbled across the biohacker slash peptide user community, and I was looking at some of the testing and reports out there. And given my pharmaceutical quality control background, I knew we could do better because we have experience testing drugs. That's our background. I knew we could be more transparent with the results we're providing. We provide all the data. I knew that we would validate our methods per the United States pharmacopoeia requirements, which are used to test human drugs in the United States. And so with that idea, we started TrustPoint officially in November of 2023. We leased our space in January of 2024. We had our first analytical method in May of 2024, developed and validated, and our first commercial client in June of 2024. And so we've grown rapidly. We now have two HPLC stacks. I just purchased the third one this week on the way, and we're on track to do about 600,000 in revenue this year. So
Wow.
we've been growing pretty quick.
And is it correct? You guys do mainly vendors, not individual tests. Is
Correct. Early on, we came across a partner. He owns Peptide Test. We had the analytical chemistry background, and he had the marketing background. And rather than compete against each other, we signed an agreement that we would get all business, like reseller testing. So if you have a business name at the top of your C of A, that business would flow to us directly. Any consumer testing, so if it's a Discord username or a consumer name, that flows through him. He manages payment and getting the sample sent to us, and we test it. So he gets a cut, essentially, of all consumer testing.
okay. So you're still doing all the testing. It's just under whose name. What now?
Exactly.
Now,
Yeah.
for individual tests, are the results published on your site or are they published on his site?
They're published on our site. So the C of A verification links actually go to trustpointlimbs.com, which is our laboratory information management system. We've talked to him about setting up his own and giving him the opportunity to separate our businesses. He just hasn't taken us up on it. We did request to terminate the agreement, but per the agreement, we have 9 months. And so I think our 9 months is up in March of 2026, and then we'll be able to test consumer samples directly as well.
Okay. Okay. So as far as testing, what tests, and when I ask these questions, I'm assuming do you guys just do mainly peptides or do you do other things as well?
Mainly peptides. We are looking at like NAD plus and some of the other nootropics. Our issue is just the amount. We're very thorough about method development and validation. We do it per United States drug requirements, and so it takes a long time. And with over 200 peptides and a 1 to 3 month method development cycle per peptide, it just takes a significant amount of time. So I don't imagine, unless there's a dramatic need, that we'll step outside of peptides anytime soon. I think probably the most immediate need is excipient, or excipients are things that are added to a product but aren't the drug itself. So for a lot of lyophilized drugs, they add things like mannitol or sorbitol or other fillers that cause the product to be more stable, more soluble. Those are called excipients. Preservatives are excipients. We might get into some excipient testing. Like we might specifically test for some of the preservatives we're starting to see, like M-creosol, parabens, We've seen phenol. So we might start doing excipient testing as well. And there's industry application for that outside of just peptides.
Okay. So, and when I ask questions, just assume I'm mainly a retatrutide guy, GLP-1s, the big ones. But what tests do you guys offer? Like if a company calls you up and says, "Hey, we want a battery of tests," which ones are you offering?
Yeah. Yep. So you can find our entire suite of tests at trustpointeanalytics.com. Generally, we offer assay and purity. Assay is the amount of milligrams in the vial, and purity is the percent purity of the product in the vial. So assay and purity on a lot of peptides. We offer endotoxin testing on any and all products. We have that capability in-house. We offer USP 71 sterility testing, sterile dosage form testing. So we can do that on any product. We've even done sterile product testing on things like sterile vials and pens. So we can test that product as well. We can do pH. We have a limited vacuum test. So we actually draw back a syringe and put it in the vial before we open it and see if it pulls a vacuum, which means it was lyophilized and closed under vacuum. I am looking at getting container closure testing, but we don't have that today.
Okay. And so pH, that's something I'm going to come back to because a big issue is bacteriostatic water, at least in my eyes. But we'll come and address that later. Sterility testing, how long does that take?
How long does sterility testing take? 14 to 21 days. And the reason behind that is we use what's the gold standard of USP 71 testing. We're not using any shortcut methods. We're not using like the Celsius systems or any other short validated system. We actually directly inoculate the sample into media, and per the standard, it has to incubate for 14 days. And so that's the majority of that time is following the USP standard. The reason they incubate so long is for slow-growing organisms. So we'll have organisms that don't show up in day 3 or day 7, but by day 14, you have turbidity in the tube, which means something's growing in there. And so we just follow the USP standard, and that's why it takes so long.
So what is the difference between endotoxins and sterility? I am a little confused on what each one is because I think they're related.
Yes. What's the difference between endotoxin and sterility? Sterility is telling you whether or not there are viable organisms in the product still.
Okay.
That's it. So you don't want to, ideally, you're not injecting yourself with an objectionable organism like staph or Clostridium that's in the product and can become active once you reconstitute it and inject yourself, right? That's what sterility is for. Endotoxin is a little different. Endotoxin is actually testing for residual lipopolysaccharides. And so there's gram-negative bacteria, and they produce these long chains. They're called lipopolysaccharides, and those can cause inflammation in the human body. And so you can have residual lipopolysaccharides even though all the organisms are dead. And so you're actually measuring the inflammation potential of those remaining lipopolysaccharides in the product, even if all the organisms are dead. So you can have a sample that passes sterility, but has very high endotoxins because the product was contaminated at some point and everything died off.
Okay. How about heavy metal? I interviewed your buddy Peter, great guy, from Januszek, and he says he does heavy metal. He's like, he feels guilty kind of pushing it on customers. What is your take? Do you do heavy metal testing, and would you agree? Is it useful or?
I don't do heavy metal testing today. I haven't gotten a lot of requests for it. It is a USP standard test. So if you can find a USP lab, any USP testing lab can do this test for you. I would just outsource it to one of those labs. In my mind, I will do it if somebody asks for it, but it's not the chief concern I have. I also use retatrutide, and I don't worry about heavy metals in it.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question. What is your chief concern? What tests do you think should be done on peptides?
I think assay impurity and sterility are the two that I consider prime. We see about 20% of batches that come to our lab fail for some reason.
Fail for either one of those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. They fail because they're overfilled. They fail because they're underfilled. We actually tested a vial 2 weeks ago that had 10 times the labeled amount of product in it.
I have to disagree with you. I love me some overfill, as long as, but then again,
as long as you know.
I am religious about checking COAs before Reconstitution. So
yeah, that's really smart. As long as you know, and I'm sure this is something you're going to ask me later, but there's also a very big assumption that every vial is the same. And you might get the one overfilled vial, and then you're over diluting or under injecting the rest of your vials.
So let's ask that question now then. And it's probably hard to tell because a lot of people might just be sending you one vial with very few people sending you multiple vials. But when you get multiple vials, how often do they vary more than, say, 1.5 milligram? Or I'm just picking a number.
I would say very rarely.
Very rarely, but it is possible.
But it is possible. And the reason I know that is, I went on from quality control in a chemistry lab to process engineering. And so I went back and got my process engineer degree. I'm actually, it's a mechanical engineer with a quality focus. And one of the things they drill into you is the main cause of manufacturing issues is process variation. And so you got to imagine, if you have a very low-tech filling facility and it's a bunch of people sitting around manually pipetting vials while they talk to their friend next to them about what happened, over the weekend, like you're going to have significant variation from vial to vial in that instance. The next up from there to decrease variation is having like a $400 fill nozzle machine, right? That you have 4 or 6 nozzles on and it's filling when you hit a button. Probably not the most accurate, but better than a bunch of people sitting around manually pipetting into vials. Then the next step beyond that, and something like the pharmaceutical industry would do, is they buy high precision filling equipment and they do something called process validation to ensure that every vial is being filled to within, 0.5% of the label target or whatever their spec is. And so there's ranges for process variation, and process variation can happen from a lot of different sources in the manufacturing process. So I don't think testing one vial ever tells you the true nature of the quality of the batch. If you want a better estimate of the quality of the batch, get a vial from the beginning of the run, if you can identify that, the middle of the run, and the end of the run, and test all 3 of those. And that gives you some idea over the course of production how the quality varied.
Okay. So going back to 20% fail, how much of that percentage fail for something that, I don't know if I want to say dangerous, because I'm sort of
objectionable.
Yes,
like
because
I'm objectionable. Yeah. I would say probably 10% fail for an objectionable reason, outside of overfill and underfill.
So that would be maybe percentage and sterility.
Yeah. 1 in 10 is going to fail for something objectionable.
Wow. Okay. Let's talk about purity, because we had this conversation on the phone. Is it 98%? Is it 99%? Does it depend on the peptide? What's the answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. What is important for purity? In general, in the U.S. drug market, it is acceptable for purity to be above 98%. Like that is generally accepted. If API comes in and it's above 98%, it's used to go on to manufacture product. As far as the safety of impurities, that is very difficult to determine and anybody's guess. You could have a peptide degradant. For example, your vials got shipped. There was a delay in transit. They sat in a tractor trailer on hot tarmac in Las Vegas. They were at 150 degrees for 24 hours, and you had some degradation. The peptide itself broke down. Those peptides are probably generally safe. Like, those degradant products are generally safe. You control them to less than 2%, you're fine. There are other examples of impurities. You can Google this. You or your followers can Google this. It's called N-nitrosamines. There was a huge blow up in the pharmaceutical industry because they discovered that there were process impurities called N-nitrosamines, and very minute amounts of them can cause multiple health problems, cancer. They're really bad. And so, knowing the safety profile of those, you have to control them to almost nothing. And so in the peptide world, it's unfortunate for us because we don't know the safety profiles of the impurities, only that they're things that should or shouldn't be there that we normally see. And it's really up to the end user to decide whether or not it's objectionable.
They accept the risk.
Yeah, we do work internally it's called forced degradation. I'm not sure a lot of other labs are doing it, where we purposefully cause the peptide to break down. So we expose it to heat, we expose it to acid, we expose it to base, and then we inject it on our method so that we can identify the different degradants from that peptide. So there's a good chance, if it's something usual, like age of the peptide or it was exposed to high temperature, that we'll be able to say, hey, this impurity that we saw in yours is consistent with a degradation product, because our testing show that it's a degradation product. But if it's something way out there, we'll just say it's an atypical peak. Okay. And we can't tell if it's good or bad.
Okay, this one is an easy one. This one stirred up, I don't know if controversy, but there's a bunch of people that say, don't shake your peptides, don't inject your bacteriostatic water onto it. Peter said bullshit. What does Josh say?
Bullshit.
Bullshit. We have double bullshit, people.
Yeah.
Shake, and I have gone on live and I grab my peptides and I will shake them up and people will have heart attacks. And
yeah, you should see Ashley and the team shaking the peptides in the lab. They got the flasks. They're doing this. They're inverting it. I mean, if you think about it, peptides are something your body generally creates. If they broke every time you were shaken, you'd probably die. So shaking is not going to affect a peptide.
Okay. So, and then I'm going to bring up what Peter said so that you could agree or disagree. Mm-hmm. I asked him, and this is the one everyone cares about, shelf life, how long you can keep your peptides. He says years in the refrigerator, decades in the freezer. Is that?
Yeah, I completely agree with him. Here's what happens. Manufacturers generally don't want to do all of the stability studies. Like a peptide synthesizer, if they're making a batch of retatrutide, they don't want to store it in a fridge and do the degradation profile and then store it in a freezer and then store it. They don't want to do all that. So they just put on their C of A's, you have to freeze it and it's good for a year, right? That covers all of their bases. And what happens is that gets translated down the supply chain until somebody does the work to demonstrate that it's stable in those different conditions. I will tell you, in the lab, we've done stability studies on our reconstituted standards. So we create known standards in flasks and we store them in the refrigerator and they don't degrade in 30 days. So like in the time a user is going to use a peptide, storing it in the fridge, I wouldn't worry about degradation.
So, yeah, and I was talking about lyophilized, but you brought up reconstituted because here is the other big questions. So,
yeah,
and maybe you'll know or maybe you're not. Bacteriostatic water, refrigerator or cupboard, or it doesn't matter?
I don't have any data on bacteriostatic water stability. So I'm going to start there. My intuition tells me it doesn't matter.
That's my...
Like, it sits in warehouses, maybe temperature controlled, maybe not, and people don't really have problems with it.
Okay. Once you reconstitute your peptide, I think the general thing, which they get from probably the official Eli Lilly and Mounjaro things, is 28 days. My personal risk is around 6 weeks. Though I've heard of people keeping it for 8 weeks to 3 months, and they're not dead. What
Mm-hmm.
do you have any data on that? Any input on that?
Just outside of our own, when we reconstitute peptides in flasks, they're good for longer than 30 days typically. We stop at 30 days, and I think that's what most people use peptides to. But no, I don't think. What you said?
The micro risk.
The micro risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fair. So no, I think it's 30 days in the fridge is fine.
Okay, but you're not going above 30 days. Okay.
No, not
Okay.
for me.
Okay.
And that, that depends. Again, there's other inputs to that. It's rare, but if you have a bad formulation, so you've got peptides, and we've seen this in the lab, that are mixed with an excipient that causes the pH to be wrong or something to be wrong, they can degrade rapidly. But for the most part, it's fine.
Okay.
I would say that's happened one time in the last year that we've tested product.
Okay. Do you guys do like alcohol percentage test on?
We're working on it. So we have a 20-year analytical R&D chemist who's working on developing methods for us. And benzyl alcohol is one of the next methods he's going to develop for us.
Yeah, that's because obviously bacteriostatic water, you could get it from Hospira, or you could get it from Chinese sources. And I have seen more than a few tests where they have done it and there's 0 alcohol in their bacteriostatic water. So you don't even know, is that even sterile water?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a risk. I will say, unfortunately in this space, options are limited because bacteriostatic water is regulated. It's prescription only. And so it's becoming very hard to get as the industry clamps down on peptide use. And it's opened the door for both good and bad actors in the bacteriostatic water space.
If you need some, I've got 4 cases in my office. I could send it to you.
Yep. No, we've been rolling the dice with generic bacteriostatic water, and that seems to be working so far.
Really?
So,
Oh, you have to tell me your source after this meeting is over.
yeah.
Okay. Let's see, bacteriostatic water. Okay, here's a good one, and this happened to me. Actually, I got 2 good ones. This happened to me when I've been on the road, and someone asked me this in the comments. What happens if you accidentally freeze your reconstituted peptide? I went to Reddit until I found the answer that I wanted, which said just thaw it out and press on. That's what I did. You've said they're stable. Is doing that one time, is that going to be okay? What do you think?
I mean, I don't recommend freezing your peptide.
This is an accident sort of thing.
Just because I don't have any data. Honestly, though, I'm going to do a test. I'll commit to doing a test on this, and we'll freeze some reconstituted peptide and see what happens. My intuition tells me likely nothing, but I can show you pre-frozen concentration and post-frozen concentration.
You know what? That would be actually pretty awesome. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's it's called freeze thaw testing. One of the tests people do.
Oh, okay. Then room temperature storage of reconstituted peptides. Like someone just messaged me the other day. They're going to Europe. Refrigerators are not available. I've read that tirzepatide, they actually said something like you can use it at room temperature for 21 days and then you should disregard it. Do you have any data, any input on room temperature storage for people who might be traveling or don't have access to a refrigerator?
Yeah, so I don't have room temperature storage data specifically. I will say, in general, I think it's probably fine.
We had that TERS thing back in.
Sorry, Ashley.
Sorry,
Ashley's
I'm chiming in.
yeah.
Okay. So we had that TERS thing back in January where we had samples sit for 2 weeks. We actually went on vacation and we had something happen before we left.
Yeah.
And we actually injected it. And this is when there was this degradant that we hadn't seen before. And so we weren't sure what was going on. And so we said, we're going to hold on to these samples and test them when we get back and try and figure out what's going on, right? So we actually injected them a week and a half, 2 weeks later, and they were at room temperature that time. And they were fine. Our re-injections
There was no
matched the
degradation.
originals.
When you say re-injection, what do you mean?
Sorry, reanalyzed them on the HPLC, like
Okay.
getting a purity percentage and an assay.
We got an initial assay value immediately after reconstituting the sample. Then 2 weeks later, after the sample sat at room temperature in our lab, at controlled room temperature, we re-injected them. It was tirzepatide specifically, and there was no noticeable degradation.
Huh. So
Now, these were not stored in backwater.
Yeah.
Our prep is a 20% acetonitrile, 80% water solution. So it is a little different, but I would say probably similar pH.
Yeah, I wouldn't be, it's not one of the things I would be concerned about. I would continue to use it even at room temperature.
for
Again, if it's degrading, the degradants from peptides are generally, I would think they're generally safe, and so I wouldn't worry about it.
okay, so
Obviously, if I have access to a refrigerator, I'm going to refrigerate it. As a chemist, I know refrigeration slows down degradation reactions, so I'm going to refrigerate it.
how about
But am I going to be worried about it if they sit at room temperature for 2 weeks? No.
how about like the sort of like sterility issues with that? Because we're talking about sort of the purity. How about sterility issues with growth of bacteria or something over that 3 weeks? Or would there really be no difference between the refrigerator and the?
As long as you're using good aseptic technique, you should never contaminate your peptide with any microbes. You should be, you wiping the top of the vial with an IPA wipe, doing all of that stuff.
So
Shouldn't be enough.
So good hygiene, good wiping down.
Yeah. As long as you have good hygiene and you don't contaminate your sample or your peptide, you shouldn't worry about that.
Okay. So we got all that. Let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about Big Pharma and coming for the peptide industry. And I'm sure it's a pretty complex subject. But what do you see? Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not a pharma shill, but I do respect the work they do. Right? I do respect the millions of dollars they invest in R&D, the millions of dollars they invest in quality controls for understanding the safety of their impurities in their products and controlling the impurities. So I respect what pharma does. And to some extent, people wouldn't be using these products if pharma hadn't proven that they have efficacy for some reason. So I'm going to start there. The flip side of it is, from my perspective, we've gotten beyond being good in the world and doing good in the world to just pure unadulterated, return on investment. My personal opinion is this market would not exist if these peptides were available to consumers who could afford them at the median income, without crazy insurance loopholes and all of that. This market wouldn't exist. So the fact that we have shortages, which I'm going to just say that if China can produce millions and millions of vials of dosages, then I don't know why we have shortages. So combined shortages, pricing is insanely high. I think they've done themselves a disservice, and that's why this market exists. That being said, they are doing everything in their power to clamp down on this market. And so they are using their congresspeople, right, to raise awareness and pass laws. They are going after the payment processors. One of our clients was fined $50,000 by their payment processor because they found out they were selling peptides. They're pressuring Amazon, who, is not following the prescription drug distribution laws and letting bacteriostatic water be distributed without a prescription. And so I think they're pressuring at all levels. just to maintain their profit.
Yeah, I keep being in this the space of peptides. I mean, I could probably, it's a broad people. Like I had 30,000 followers, and then the followers. So you hear a lot. And it's just astounding when you think that, like, this was on TikTok. That's probably only 5 to 10% of peptide users. The rest are just out there. So in my mind, a million users of peptides is not out of the question.
I think that's on the low end.
Okay.
You'll be surprised. We live in Hopkins, Michigan, which is like the land of satellite internet and cows and cornfields. And when we started a lab 2 years ago, people were like, "Oh, you're testing that? I have a friend who is injecting this stuff or sells this stuff." And I'm like, I think there are way more people on it than anybody realizes.
Oh, wow. And then
I also think too, if you look back, I think this is something that was accessible to wealthy people through wellness clinics and other things, and it's becoming more accessible to mainstream. Even the non-regulated stuff like the BPC 157 and the GHKCU, I think that stuff has been around a long time. It's just becoming more accessible.
Yeah, it's sort of like, and my sort of theory on this is because the GLP-1s like tirzepatide and retatrutide are so life-changingly successful. I mean, as someone who, used retatrutide, and I'm now 55, I got a six-pack for like the first time since I was 20, and it's amazing. But I think people automatically assume that every other peptide is going to be as effective. I am skeptical of many peptides personally.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I do know that the GLP-1s. Okay, and you said something about the money in the pharmaceutical industry. Here's my question. Like, I hear that, like, when retatrutide comes out, it's going to be thousands of dollars, thousands and thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. But here we are. I can go and buy retatrutide for under $1 a milligram. That's well tested. I mean, I could get these battery of tests. So there's hundreds of thousands of people that are using it, and it's working. So you can't say, well, it's not fake. No, I mean, these are people that are obese that have got skinny now on.
Yeah.
So the markup to me just seems extreme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think the days of like Jonas Salk, giving the vaccine for free, to the world, those days are over, and it's overkill. I think if they again, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. If they made these drugs available to consumers and affordable at the median income in the U.S., this market wouldn't exist
at their scale. Yeah.
And instead, they're trying to charge $1,300 for a month for something you can buy for $8.
Yeah,
it's just too much. And I will say, I am a firm believer that no matter the amount of testing we do, and we can do a lot of testing on products, it's not the same as
the quality control.
The quality control and quality assurance of the pharmaceutical industry. You can't test quality into product. After it's made, you and I can't test it and test quality into it. And there's a ton of investment in the pharmaceutical industry into building quality, into supply chain and manufacturing processes in a way that we just can't replicate. So if you can afford to spend $1,400 a month or $2,000 a month on retatrutide when it, gets approved, like, go for it, like, have at it. But for people like us, where that's not, you either can't get it, insurance won't approve it, it's too much out of pocket. Like, it's just, this is the only other option.
I think on the pen, he's a media guy in the GLP-1 space. I thought I saw a video where he said that and I don't know if it was Novo or Eli Lilly's, one of the big pharmacy factories, they actually did an inspection, and it actually wasn't that good of an inspection. I wish I had the information at hand, but
oh, like the FDA did an inspection on the facility. It happens. I will say, you know, an FDA inspector doesn't ever go into a facility and find nothing. You know, that being said, I'd have to see the letter and determine the level of systemic failure. I've been a part of FDA inspections, so I know how the process works. But
okay, and let's end up. Have you guys personally experienced any pressure from the pharmacy industry to not do what you're doing?
Not yet. It may happen as famous people like yourself give us a platform.
I am honestly. I was semi-famous a week ago. I'm actually down. It has become tough to have any sort of social media experience. But hey, I will put this up on. I'll put this up on YouTube. I will take clips of it and try and get it widely shared, because at the end of the day,
you're a likable, high energy guy, right? I'm sure you'll figure out how to get it back. But no, I haven't experienced any pressure directly. I'm not. It's possible that it could happen. The nice thing about a lab is we're once removed from the supply chain. Like we're not selling it, you know, so we're not, you know, violating, you know, state prescription drug laws. We're not selling it. We're testing it. And for somebody to say, well, so you're not allowed to test products. Well, good luck. You know, good luck winning that in court.
Okay. Well, Josh, I think that's all I have for you today. Here, if you just stay on, I'm just going to end the recording right here.
Yep.